Moving to this now, 8 years and 7 mayors later, Nelson Mandela Bay Metro could be gearing up for yet another leadership shakeup. A new coalition could be on the horizon, one promising to bring political as well as administrative stability to the troubled metro. The City of Johannesburg is also going through its own shakeup, with the ANC back in charge after Dada Morero's return as mayor. Let's look at how political instability in metros impacts service delivery. I am joined now by Professor Alex van der Heever, who's a governance expert at Wits University. Prof, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Firstly, what are the main factors that contribute to this high turnover of mayors? We spoke about Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay. And how does this kind of instability impact the city's governance and also service delivery?
Well, I think to a large extent it is the nature of the coalitions that are formed. I mean, we are going to face coalition government all the way forward in South Africa's democracy. That's what our electoral system gravitates towards until we have some changes in the Electoral Act. The problem, I would say, is that in some cases the coalitions are structured to actually achieve a status quo, to actually keep the past going to some degree, to hang on to power rather than to actually share power with sort of parties that might disagree and might have a different view, and that could create genuine stability, but would require that there's a kind of a degree of that there are adults in the room that are running the show. Yeah. I think that the problem has been in both Nelson Mandela Bay and Johannesburg is that we've had coalitions that are very brittle because they've attempted to really pull together people through payoffs rather than because they're trying to create a genuine coalition that is stable and can act in the interests of the public.
Let's unpack those opening remarks. How does frequent leadership change in metros like Johannesburg, for instance, how does it affect long-term urban planning, but also infrastructure development in these areas?
So first of all, the thing is to look at whether or not there has been frequent change in leadership. I would say that the recent change of mayors in Johannesburg hasn't actually been a change in leadership. The ANC has been in charge all along. It was largely a token mayor, and he's just basically been switched out, and he's been put in another token position. But when you do have frequent changes of leadership that impact on the administration, you create enormous instability and uncertainty within the civil service, the actual administration of the organization, because it impacts on the development of strategies and the execution of those strategies. And when you have this turnover, the question is really what are the reasons for it, and if it is to improve services and to improve strategies, that would be good. But what we've seen is that these changes in leadership are highly disruptive and often are about capturing control over the resources of the metro rather than an attempt to actually improve performance of services. There's been no improvement. There's been massive deterioration in both cities, both metros.
There's also the argument that with this kind of political tussling, it could also hamper service delivery efforts. Maybe let's explain how political instability, especially at the mayoral level, might influence the operational efficacy of city services, for instance, but also the overall quality of life for residents. Let's speak to that.
So what you want from a mayor and what you want from your key portfolio heads is they have enormous convening power to get coherent strategies developed. And if you have weak leadership, so I'm going to stress the one aspect, which is the quality of leadership. Yeah. Where you see that this type of coalition structure and the frequent changes is really about jockeying for power positions rather than using the power of a political position in order to convene a sort of social engagement on the development of good strategies and implementation. We see none of that. That is not what's happening here. So we have very, very thin leadership coming from the mayoral level. We don't see it in the key portfolio positions. And it's not clear that any of the people are properly qualified to be leaders. So it largely looks like it's tagged together in order to create some sort of power structure to hold on to power rather than to use the power of politics and the political position to effectively use that to drive decisions and strategies. We see it's not that. That is clearly not what's happening here. Yeah. And really, we will have to see. The electorate generates this consequence. So it's a question really as to how long the electorate tolerates the configurations that have been generated by the, by the choices made thus far. There's a learning process that goes on.
But Prof, on the flip side, in what ways can a stable leadership approach indeed improve service delivery in cities which are plagued by this kind of political turmoil that we're seeing?
So one of the problems I think that's emerged is that there's been, very, very deep corruption. And when you've got deep corruption in government, there's an incredible fear of a change in government, because it means people go to jail and the sort of the money pipeline gets cut off. So you don't have normal politics. You don't have people forming coalitions on the basis of policy issues. And these aren't policy issues. These are survival. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, is we don't actually have normal politics, because people have to hold on to power to stay out of jail potentially, and also to stay connected to the money pipeline. So what we would benefit from is if we had coalitions which included opposition, parties that are not necessarily on the same page from a policy perspective, but are going to be very effective in holding each other to account, but are also going to be under huge pressure to deliver, because that's how they will the electorate will keep them in power, or at least receiving sufficient votes. So it's really important for people to be able to demonstrate that they can do things when they're in government. So I'm not sure that that's the dynamic that we're seeing at the moment, but that would stabilize the metros substantially. And I think we're unfortunately not seeing that level of maturity in the development of the coalitions. And largely, I would attribute it to the fact that there is protection of significant networks of extraction.
But looking at Nelson Mandela Bay, what potential effects could the recent coalition talks, but also the possible power shifts have, especially on the city's stability and governance?
Well, I think that if it really depends again on whether or not there is, because it's very easy to create a stable coalition, but the question really is, what is the calculus, the calculation that is being considered? If the calculation is to preserve patronage, then it's going to be quite difficult to get a coherent coalition, because there isn't sufficient support for either one of the stronger parties in a coalition. They would have to work together. And the question really is, can they work together? If they work together, I think we would have a very strong, stable government that could actually move forward and progress. But people are going to have to give stuff up for that to happen. So the question really is that the kind of coalition that's being considered, or are there going to be little parties with 1 or 2 seats that are just used to kind of tune out one political player and keep somebody holding on to the purse strings? And if that's the kind of coalition that you end up with, it's going to be very bad for the metro.
But Prof, more broadly, how do the challenges faced by Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay also reflect broader trends in South African municipal governance?
Well, I think that I don't think we're seeing the full consequences of the political structure that we have played out at this point. I think that the question really is, how tolerant are constituents going to be for this kind of misgovernance that is experienced? Because again, I think that people only get to experience the removal of bad actors every 5 years through an election process, and there's a question as to whether that is actually too long. Society needs to be able to weigh in more effectively on conduct in between elections, because you basically put people in a position of power and then you wait 5 years, and a lot can be done very badly or very well in a period of 5 years. So I think that partly we're victims of the political process and the timelines, and South Africa could definitely benefit from increasing the degree of sort of social impact, like recall votes and different kinds of constructs for the electoral process that can allow for people to be a lot more vulnerable politically when they fail to perform. At this point in time, it appears that many political parties that have been in power for a long time don't really care about the voter. They know they're protected for a long period of time. have to then wiggle around for just before an election and hopefully stay in power with like-minded political parties. So but at this point in time, in a city like Johannesburg, we actually can't afford another 5 years or another 7 years of this kind of misgovernance. So Johannesburg is too big to fail, but it looks like they're doing a damn good job of trying.